Before we dive into tonight's chilling tales, welcome back to Fear Begins, the place where true horror finds a voice tonight. We are venturing deep into the Appalachian Mountains, a land filled with beauty, mystery, and shadows that never seem to fade. The stories you are about to hear are not just legends. They are accounts passed down from locals who swear they are real. Make sure you are listening with the lights off. And let me know in the comments where you are watching from, because I promise, these Appalachian ghost stories will linger with you long after the video ends. Now, let us begin. The Appalachian Mountains have always carried an unsettling kind of beauty. For every breathtaking view, there is an equally chilling story whispered in the valleys, passed down through generations and told around fire pits on cold nights. Some of these stories are so eerie, so deeply woven into the culture of Appalachia, that they simply refuse to fade away tonight. We begin with the first of 10 such stories, real tales from locals who swear by them, accounts that have been kept alive, not because they are comforting, but because they are too haunting to be forgotten. The first ghost story takes us deep into the mountains of western North Carolina, where an old trail known to hikers winds past the remnants of what used to be a mining settlement. Most of the wooden cabins have long since collapsed into themselves, but there is one that still stands barely. Its roof sags, its porch looks ready to crumble, and its single broken window gapes open like a watchful eye. Hikers who pass by this structure often report the same thing, an unshakable feeling of being watched from that window, followed by a creeping cold that makes them pick up their pace until the cabin is well out of sight. One hiker, a man named Aaron, decided to test the legend. He and his friend Mark had been hiking the trail for years, and both had heard locals call the remaining cabin the widow's house. Rumor had it, a miner's wife lost her mind waiting for her husband to return from work in the shaft below, never knowing that he'd been buried alive in a collapse. When the search was eventually called off, she refused to leave. Locals whispered that she wasted away inside that cabin, rocking back and forth by the window, waiting until the day she finally died. Aaron wanted to see for himself. On an overcast afternoon, with the sun dipping lower than it should have been, he convinced Mark to step onto the cabin's porch with him. The wooden boards groaned beneath their weight, dust stirred in the air, and the faint smell of mildew and something older, something like decay, crept out of the dark interior. Inside, the place was nearly empty, a collapsed chair, the frame of a rocking chair tipped sideways, and in the corner, a pile of broken wood that might once have been a table. The window that hikers always talked about was directly across from the front door. It framed the trail outside like a painting. Nothing more, but then, as Aaron stood there staring, he swore he saw movement, a figure in the reflection of the glass, his breath caught. He thought he saw the outline of a woman, thin, bent, with hair hanging around her face. She wasn't standing inside the cabin with them. No, she was standing outside, just past the window, looking in. Mark didn't see her. He was too busy muttering about the smell and insisting they should leave. But Aaron couldn't tear his eyes away from that faint image. For one terrifying moment, he swore her eyes met his through the reflection, and her lips curved upward into the faintest smile. Then, as if someone had drawn a curtain across the glass, the image was gone. He didn't tell Mark until later, didn't mention it when they practically ran off the porch and down the trail. But that night, as he tried to fall asleep, Aaron swore he heard the creak of wood, the sound of a rocking chair moving slowly back and forth, and the faintest whisper of breath against his ear. He never hiked that trail again. The second ghost story leads us into Kentucky, where coal mining towns have left behind not only scars in the earth but shadows in memory. Near one such town, locals still tell of a road they refuse to drive down at night. Known by everyone simply as Dead Man's Hollow, the story goes back nearly a century, when a coal miner named Samuel was said to have been murdered by his crew for reporting unsafe practices to management. They left his body in the hollow, unmarked and forgotten, so no one would ever find him. But the men underestimated just how persistent a restless spirit could be for decades. Travelers on that lonely road reported the same thing. A man stepping into the middle of the road, lantern in hand, waving it desperately as if to flag down help. Those who stopped claimed the man would approach, his face pale and covered in soot, eyes sunken as if they hadn't seen light in years. But before he could speak, he would vanish, leaving the lantern light to fade into nothing. Others who refused to stop reported something worse. Their cars stalling out, tires locking, or even the distinct sound of knuckles rapping against their windows in the dead of night. One woman named Clara shared her experience online, though she admitted she was hesitant to relive it. Driving through Dead Man's Hollow on her way home late one night, she noticed the faint glow of a lantern up ahead. She slowed instinctively, thinking it was a stranded hiker or maybe a car pulled off on the shoulder. But as she got closer, the figure holding the lantern stepped directly into the middle of the road. She slammed the brakes. Her headlights illuminated him perfectly. A tall, thin man in ragged work clothes, his face blackened by coal dust except for streaks where sweat, or maybe tears had cut through. His eyes were wide, desperate. He held the lantern aloft with one hand, his other stretched toward her as if pleading. Clara swore she saw his lips moving, forming words she couldn't hear. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. Her car engine sputtered and died right there on the road. She sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel, too terrified to even breathe. Then came the knocking, soft at first, like someone brushing against the glass, then louder, insistent. On the driver's side window, Clara turned her head, and for a split second she saw him, Samuel, standing there, his face pressed against the glass, eyes hollow and filled with grief. She screamed, fumbling with her keys until the engine finally roared back to life. When she looked again, he was gone. The road empty except for the darkness stretching ahead. Even now, drivers who know the story refuse to take that road after sunset. Too many have reported seeing the same pale man. Too many have claimed to hear the faint knocking on their windows long after leaving the hollow behind. Samuel's body was never recovered, and it seems his soul has never stopped searching for someone who might finally help him find peace. The second story comes from a place that locals in eastern Kentucky call the Hollow of Whispers. It is not marked on any modern map, but ask an old-timer at one of the gas stations off the back roads and you might get a nod, followed by a quick change of subject. Few people want to talk about it, and those who do seem to regret opening their mouths once the words leave their lips. The Hollow got its name long before anyone can remember, and the legend tied to it is older than the families who built their cabins in the shadow of the mountains. They say the land itself has a memory, and when enough blood has been spilled on it, the memory does not fade. It repeats, echoes, it whispers. One account comes from a man named Calvin, a retired miner who grew up not far from the Hollow. He said when he was a boy, his older brother dared him to sneak down there at night. Calvin, being stubborn and foolish, took the dare. He was 12 years old, carrying only a lantern and a pocket knife when he walked down into the hollow. He described it as the kind of darkness that swallows everything whole. Even the light of his lantern seemed weak, barely pushing back the shadows. At first, nothing happened. The woods were still, the night ordinary. But as he went deeper, he began to hear voices, faint at first, like a woman crying far off in the distance, then clearer, stronger, as if they were moving toward him. He said he froze in place, holding the lantern high, but there was no one there. The voices grew into whispers, not one but many, circling him, calling his name, Calvin, Calvin. He swore the whispers came from every direction at once, like the trees themselves had mouths. His lantern flickered. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the ground, and that was when he saw them. Dozens of pale faces peering out from the darkness, eyes hollow, mouths opening and closing as though they were speaking. But the words never matched the whispers he heard. He ran. He did not care where. He just sprinted through the brush, tripping, scraping his knees, until he burst out of the hollow and collapsed on the dirt road. His brother, who had been waiting for him, said Calvin's hair had gone white around the temples. Though he was barely a teenager, Calvin never went back. And he said his dreams were haunted for years by those whispering voices, even as an old man. His eyes would water when he spoke of it now. Most stories like that you could dismiss as exaggeration or a child's imagination. But Calvin was not the only one. In 1993, 2 hikers reported stumbling across the hollow after getting lost. They had not heard of the legend, had no idea where they were, but they both told the same story to the sheriff's office. They heard voices in the trees, they felt watched, surrounded, and both claimed to see pale faces in the brush, staring at them. They left the trail behind, sprinted uphill, and did not stop until they found the road. They never returned to finish their hike. There are even darker stories tied to that place. A woman named Eloise, who lived in a cabin near the hollow in the 1950s, claimed that her husband disappeared one night after storming out of the house. The last she heard of him was his boots crunching on gravel as he walked down toward the hollow. He never came back. A search party combed the woods for 3 days. No tracks, no body, no signs of struggle, just gone. Eloise moved away soon after and swore she would never set foot near those mountains again. The strangest detail is what hunters and wanderers sometimes bring back from the hollow objects. Things that should not be there. A miner's helmet rusted and dented, but no mines for miles. A doll's head, porcelain, cracked and dirty, found wedged in the roots of a tree. A torn shoe with no signs of wear, sitting perfectly upright in the middle of a clearing. People say these objects belong to the ones who were taken, offerings left behind by the land itself as reminders. Locals who live closest to the hollow follow unspoken rules. Do not walk into the woods after dark. Do not answer when you hear your name called, no matter how familiar the voice, and never, under any circumstance, bring something out of the hollow. If you do, it will not stay quiet. The whispers will follow you home. Calvin's nephew once broke that rule. He picked up an old pocket watch he found half buried in the hollow and slipped it into his pocket. That night he said he woke to the sound of ticking, even though the watch itself no longer worked. The ticking grew louder and louder until it filled his bedroom. Then came the whispers, low, hissing voices at his ear, repeating his name over and over again. He threw the watch out into the yard the next morning. When he went to check, it was gone. Even today, hunters tell of hearing strange voices when they pass near that part of the mountain. One man swore he saw a group of shadow figures standing just inside the tree line. Watching him, he turned and left without looking back, abandoning his deer stand and gear. He said no trophy buck was worth bringing whatever lived in that hollow back to his home. What makes the Hollow of Whispers so unsettling is that it does not play by the rules of a ghost story. It is not one spirit haunting a cabin or one figure appearing on a road. It is the land itself, alive with something old, something that feeds on fear, something that refuses to be forgotten. And those who hear their name whispered in the dark, they say it is already too late. So if you ever find yourself lost in the hills of Kentucky and the woods suddenly fall silent, if the air feels heavy and you think you hear your name called from just beyond the trees, do not answer, do not follow, because you might just find yourself in the Hollow of Whispers, and once the land remembers you, it will not let you go. The third story takes us deep into West Virginia, where the coal towns rise and fall with the mountains, and where every hollow seems to hold its own secrets. In these hills, people whisper about a place called the Widow's Curve, a sharp bend in an old mining road where the trees lean too close, where the guardrails are rusted and bent like they have been struck too many times to count, and where headlights vanish without explanation. The legend goes back to the 1930s, when coal mining was at its peak. A man named William Thatcher worked the mines day and night, and his wife, Margaret, waited at home for him. They lived in a small house near the bend in the road, the one people later called Widow's Curve. One stormy night, William never came back. He was supposed to be on a late shift, walking the ridge home. But somewhere between the mine and his house, he disappeared. The company chalked it up to a landslide or an accident. But Margaret insisted something had taken him. She was seen night after night walking the curve in her black shawl, holding a lantern, calling his name. Her voice carried through the trees, desperate and broken, until even the men hardened by coal dust said the sound chilled their bones. They say she walked that road until her body finally gave out years later, collapsing in the same curve where her husband had vanished. Since then, people swear she never stopped searching. Truckers driving late at night along that road report seeing a figure at the bend. A woman in black, her face hidden beneath a shawl, carrying a lantern that swings side to side. Some claim she steps into the road and waves for them to stop, her mouth opening in a silent scream. But when the headlights hit her fully, she disappears, leaving the air colder than it should be. One driver in 1974 nearly wrecked his rig swerving to avoid her. He swore she looked real, solid, until she vanished. The man left trucking for good after that, telling his family he would rather starve than drive that road again. His story was printed in the local paper, along with others who came forward, each one describing the same thing: a woman in black, a lantern, a scream that nobody could hear but everyone could feel. But the widow is not just seen, she is heard. Campers and teenagers who have lingered near the curve talk about a woman's voice calling out from the woods. Sometimes it is a cry, sometimes a whisper, sometimes she calls names. Names of people who were never there, names she should not know. One group of kids in the 1990s dared each other to sit on the curve at midnight. They swore the lantern light appeared in the trees before the voice came, whispering the name of the youngest boy in the group. They ran before the light reached the road, but that boy, now grown, says he still dreams of a woman's shadow standing outside his window. And then there are the accidents. Widow's Curve is notorious for them. Cars found twisted against trees, engines running but no driver inside. In the 1980s, a young couple's car was discovered wrecked at the bend. Both passengers gone. Their families said they had no reason to disappear, no history of running away. They were simply gone. Locals believe the widow found them and took them with her, forever wandering the road in search of her husband. A retired state trooper named Daniel once admitted to his nephew that he hated being assigned patrol near Widow's Curve. He said that on more than one occasion he pulled over, certain he had seen someone standing on the road. But when he stepped out with his flashlight, the beam always caught the same thing: a lantern swinging in the air by itself, moving back and forth as though an invisible hand carried it. He never reported it in his official notes. Who would believe him? But he swore to his nephew it was real, and that if you followed the lantern into the trees, you would never find your way back. One of the most unsettling accounts came from a family in 2002. They were driving home from a late-night trip when their daughter, only 6 years old, said, "Why is that lady crying on the road?" Neither parent saw anyone, but as they approached the bend, the girl screamed, covering her eyes, begging them to go faster when they pressed her later. She said she saw a woman covered in black, standing at her window, her mouth open as if she were screaming, but no sound came out for weeks afterward. The little girl refused to sleep alone. What makes the Widow's Curve terrifying is not just the sightings, but the consistency over nearly a century. Stories match, different people, different times, the same description: a woman in black, a lantern, the curve of the road, and a silence so heavy it presses against your chest. Skeptics claim it is just headlights reflecting oddly, or drivers falling asleep at the wheel. But believers argue that too many lives have been lost there, too many names whispered into the dark. They say Margaret Thatcher's grief was so heavy that when her body died, her spirit refused to leave. It clung to the road, to the bend where she last called her husband's name, and now anyone who passes through is caught in her endless search. One chilling detail often overlooked is the lantern itself. People who have seen it up close describe it as an old-fashioned oil lamp. Cracked glass, the flame inside flickering though no one carries it. Sometimes the flame burns blue instead of yellow. Old folklore says a blue flame marks the presence of the dead. If that is true, then Widow's Curve is not haunted by one ghost, but by many drawn to her grief, trapped in her endless wandering. Even today, some truckers refuse to take that road at night. Locals warn travelers to roll their windows up when approaching the bend, to ignore any figure that waves them down. Because if you stop, if you answer her cry, she might not let you go. So if you ever find yourself driving a lonely mountain road in West Virginia and the curve ahead looks too sharp, too dark, too quiet, and if you catch the faint glow of a lantern swinging in the distance, do not slow down, do not stop, because on that road the widow still waits, and once she sees your headlights, she will make you part of her endless search. The cold hit me first. Not the kind that seeps through your jacket or makes you wish for thicker gloves. This was different, unnatural. Like the air itself had been drained of life. I had driven down into a hollow in Kentucky where the fog clung to the road like it wanted to swallow it whole. The locals called it Dead Man's Hollow, a name I laughed off until the night I saw her. The road was narrow, hemmed in by trees that seemed to lean over the asphalt, their branches clawing at the night sky. My headlights barely cut through the fog, so I slowed down, hands gripping the wheel tight. That is when I saw her standing in the middle of the lane. A girl no older than 16, her dress pale and fluttering like it was caught in a wind I could not feel. I slammed the brakes, tires screaming against the pavement. My heart hammered so loud I thought it might burst. She did not move. She just stared at me, eyes dark and hollow. Her mouth parted like she wanted to speak, but no sound came. I blinked once, maybe twice, and she was gone. Later I learned the legend. A girl named Sarah had lived in one of the houses that used to dot the hollow back in the 1920s. Before the floods and landslides wiped most of them away, she was walking home one evening when a drunk driver barreled through the fog and hit her. They say she died instantly, but her spirit never left. Drivers began reporting a girl appearing in the fog, always in the middle of the road, always staring with those hollow eyes. Some said if you stopped, she would vanish. Others swore she would appear in the backseat of your car, silent, dripping water as though she had been pulled from a river. What makes the story unsettling is that the sightings never stopped. From the 1940s through today, different drivers, locals, travelers, even police officers have told the same tale. Some see her by the road, others in the mirror. One sheriff admitted in a hushed tone that he gave her a ride once. He swore he picked up a young girl who waved him down in the fog. She sat in his back seat for 10 miles, silent, until she vanished as the car passed the old stone bridge. He quit the force 2 months later. Teenagers turned the hollow into a dare spot, daring each other to drive through after midnight. Some came out laughing, swearing it was just fog and shadows. Others came out pale, swearing they heard someone whisper their name inside the car. One boy refused to speak at all afterward, staring blankly at his friends for hours before finally muttering. She was sitting beside me, and then there is the fog. People describe it as thicker than anywhere else in the region, clinging not just to the road but to your clothes, your skin, even your lungs. One man said it felt like drowning in mist, every breath a struggle, every step heavy. Scientists argue the hollow just traps moisture, but locals claim it is Sarah pulling you into her world, the world between life and death where she is forever trapped. What chills me most is how specific the details are. Drivers consistently describe her dress as pale blue, frayed at the edges, as if she has been wearing it for 100 years. They talk about her hair long and dark, dripping wet. Some say she reaches out as if begging for help. Others that she raises her hand to shield her face from headlights, reliving the moment she died. And if you are unlucky enough to stop, she might climb inside, leaving the passenger seat damp and cold long after she disappears. One couple told of driving through Dead Man's Hollow late at night. The fog was so thick they could barely see. Suddenly the husband screamed, slamming the brakes. His wife turned and saw the girl standing directly in front of the car, her palms pressed against the hood, her eyes empty. They both sat frozen, watching as she leaned forward, her face inches from the windshield. Then without a sound she melted into the fog. The wife swears the glass was cold to the touch afterward, colder than ice, though the engine beneath was burning hot. Skeptics claim the hollow just plays tricks on the mind. Fog distorts light, shadows look human, exhaustion makes drivers hallucinate. But can all these people across decades hallucinate the same girl, the same dress, the same dripping hair? Can science explain why cars sometimes stall in the hollow, engines dying until the fog clears? Or why radios fill with static the moment headlights cut into the mist? Even hunters and hikers who avoid the road talk of seeing her figure flitting between trees, too pale to be anything but unnatural. Some hear her crying, a soft, broken sob that rises from the ground itself. Others claim she runs alongside them, her feet never touching the earth, her shadow stretching too long, too far. But perhaps the most terrifying account came from a priest. He was driving home one night when he saw the girl at the edge of the road. Instead of fear, he felt pity. He slowed and whispered a prayer, asking her to rest. The girl turned her head toward him, her mouth moving soundlessly, and for a brief moment, he swore she smiled. Then she vanished, leaving the fog to swallow the road again. He believes she is not malevolent, just lost, bound to the place where her life was taken. But others insist she has grown angry over the years, tired of wandering alone, ready to drag others into her sorrow. Whether she is vengeful or tragic, the truth is that no one passes through Dead Man's Hollow without remembering it. The fog is too thick, the silence too heavy, the feeling too strong. Something is there, watching, waiting. And if you ever see the girl in the pale blue dress standing in the road, staring at you with hollow eyes, whatever you do, do not stop. because once she climbs inside, she may never leave. The mountains have always been a place where legends linger, where whispers of the past refuse to die, and sometimes the most unsettling encounters happen not in the deep woods or at forgotten cemeteries, but right in the heart of communities people still call home. There's a stretch of road that locals in eastern Kentucky avoid after dark. On a map, it looks ordinary, just a winding back road that threads through hollows and ridges, connecting two small towns. But everyone around there knows it by a different name, the Road of the Weeping Woman. It has been the site of so many encounters that even the bravest drivers hesitate to test their luck. Some say if you see her, it's only a vision. Others insist it's a warning, and ignoring it could be deadly. The story traces back decades. A young woman named Mary was said to have lived in one of the tiny, clapboard houses near the bend in the road. Times were hard. Her husband worked long hours in the coal mines, and Mary struggled to raise their two children alone. One stormy night, he failed to return. Hours stretched into days, and then came the devastating news: a collapse underground. His body was never recovered. Mary was consumed by grief, her cries echoing through the hollow for weeks. Then, one morning, her children were found drowned in the creek. No one knew if it was an accident or something darker. Mary herself vanished soon after. That's when sightings began. Drivers report seeing a figure standing at the sharpest bend of the road, wearing a long white dress, her hair hanging wet across her face. She clutches something close to her chest and sobs softly, but when anyone gets near, she vanishes. Locals who grew up hearing the tale learn to drive with their eyes fixed on the pavement, never daring to look to the side, because those who do sometimes swerve, convinced a woman is stepping out in front of them. Some accidents have been blamed on her presence, and whether she's real or not, people say the fear is real enough to kill. One story comes from a man named Dale, a retired truck driver. He was on a late-night haul. Cutting through back roads to avoid traffic, he swears that as he came around the bend, his headlights caught a woman standing in the middle of the road. She was soaked, barefoot, holding what looked like a child wrapped in a blanket. He slammed on the brakes so hard the trailer fishtailed, and when he jumped out, ready to help, there was no one there. Only silence, and the sound of water dripping from the trees after a light rain. To this day, Dale refuses to take that road, even if it adds hours to his drive. But what makes the story linger isn't just the ghostly sightings. It's the effect she has on those who encounter her. People say that after seeing her, they're plagued with nights of restless sleep, waking up to the sound of muffled crying just outside their windows. Some describe hearing footsteps pacing on gravel driveways, only to find nothing when they check. A few claim they've seen wet footprints leading to their doors. The Weeping Woman doesn't just haunt the road she follows. A group of teenagers once decided to test the legend. Armed with flashlights and bravado, they parked near the bend just after midnight. They waited, half joking, half nervous, daring each other to get out of the car. At first nothing happened. Then, as the night grew quieter, they all heard it. The unmistakable sound of a woman sobbing in the dark. It seemed to come from the woods, then closer, until it was right beside the car. One of the teens panicked, flicked on his flashlight. The beam caught the edge of the road, and there she was, a pale figure, her face obscured, clutching that bundled shape against her chest. She lifted her head slowly, and before they could see her eyes, the flashlight flickered and died. The group scrambled. The car engine sputtered, and they peeled out, swearing they'd never go back for weeks after. Each of them reported strange happenings at home. One boy said he woke up to find water pooled on his bedroom floor, though nothing had leaked. Another girl swore she saw a figure watching her from across her yard at night, vanishing the moment she blinked. They said it felt as if Mary's grief had attached itself to them, refusing to let go. What makes her legend even darker is the connection locals believe she has to tragedy. On more than one occasion, fatal accidents along that road have been preceded by sightings of her figure. Drivers lose control, veering into trees or over the steep embankments. Survivors say they swerved because they thought someone was in the road. In a way, she becomes both victim and culprit, crying out for her loss while creating new grief for others. Folks in the community treat the road with quiet respect. Parents warn their kids not to wander there after dark. Preachers speak of her as a lost soul, unable to move on. Some older residents leave offerings, flowers, small trinkets, at the bend where she's most often seen, hoping to soothe her spirit. But the sightings never stop, if anything. They grow stronger with each generation, as if her sorrow deepens with time. Skeptics dismiss it all, chalking it up to imagination. Headlights reflecting strangely, or the human mind playing tricks when alone at night. But those who've seen her don't argue. They don't even like to talk about it. And that silence says more than denial ever could. One local woman told of a chilling experience that left her shaken. She was driving home from work late, exhausted and distracted. As she rounded the curve, she saw a woman standing in the ditch, soaked and shivering. Against her better judgment, she slowed, rolling down her window to ask if she needed help. The woman looked up, and in the glow of the headlights, her face appeared sunken, her skin unnaturally pale, her eyes filled with bottomless grief. Before the driver could react, the figure vanished, leaving only the echo of a sob in the night air. The woman said she couldn't sleep for days afterward, feeling as though someone was sitting at the foot of her bed, watching. The weeping woman of the Appalachian backroad is more than just a ghost story. She's a symbol of grief that never healed, of sorrow so heavy it imprinted itself on the land. Whether she's real, a hallucination, or a cautionary tale passed down through generations, she serves as a reminder that some pain never fades. It just finds new voices to haunt. If you ever find yourself driving through the Appalachians and your route takes you onto an unfamiliar winding road, pay close attention. If you hear the faint sound of crying through the night air, resist the urge to stop. Keep your eyes fixed straight ahead, because once you see her, there's no guarantee you'll leave her sorrow behind. I never believed the stories about the abandoned church in the hills of West Virginia. To me, they sounded like just another batch of local legends, the kind older folks told to keep kids from wandering too far. But one night, curiosity got the best of me. What I found inside that broken-down building is something I can never forget, and something I sometimes wish I had never seen. It was a bitter autumn evening, the kind where the air smells of smoke from fireplaces and the last leaves rattle against the trees like bones. My friend Caleb had been pestering me for weeks about checking out the old church. We were both in our 20s, restless and desperate for some kind of thrill. He claimed he'd heard from his cousin that strange lights had been seen inside at night. Some even said the bell rang on its own. Though no one had touched it in decades, at first I laughed it off. But as Halloween crept closer, the dare grew more tempting. Maybe it was the chill in the air, or maybe it was the unspoken challenge between us. Either way, I found myself agreeing to go with him. We loaded a couple of flashlights, parked the truck along a gravel turnout, and started walking the narrow trail that led to the church. The building came into view after about 20 minutes of silence, and even from a distance, I felt my stomach tighten. It stood crooked, leaning as though the earth beneath it had shifted. The steeple was cracked, the roof sagging in places, and ivy clung to its sides like skeletal fingers. Even so, there was a strange beauty to it. Bathed in the pale light of the rising moon, Caleb grinned like a kid at Christmas. "Told you it was creepy," he whispered. His breath fogged in the cold air. The closer we got, the heavier the atmosphere felt. The woods behind us seemed unnaturally quiet. No owls, no rustle of leaves. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. When we reached the front doors, I noticed they were chained shut, rusted links wound tight. But the windows along the side had long since shattered, leaving jagged teeth of glass in the frames. Caleb didn't hesitate. He climbed through, and though every part of me screamed not to follow, I wasn't about to be left outside alone. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic like old blood. The wooden pews were warped, some collapsed, and the pulpit stood crooked, as if bowing under a weight no one else could see. Dust hung thick in the beams of our flashlights. But what unsettled me most were the walls. Faint carvings covered nearly every surface. Crosses, symbols I didn't recognize, and crude words etched deep into the wood. "Looks like people have been messing around in here," Caleb muttered, running his hand across one of the carvings. His voice echoed strangely, bouncing back at us in a way that didn't feel right. We moved deeper into the church. That's when I noticed the bell rope still hanging, swaying slightly though there was no breeze. I tried to tell myself it was just our movement stirring the air, But as we stood there, the sound of a faint hum filled the room. It was low at first, so soft I thought I was imagining it. Then it grew louder, unmistakable. It wasn't mechanical, it sounded human. A voice humming a slow, mournful tune. Caleb froze, his flashlight trembling in his hand. "You hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, unable to find words. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, seeping through the walls, through the cracks in the floor. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence was suffocating. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. I wanted to leave, but Caleb pushed on, heading toward the back of the church where a narrow staircase led down to the basement. The steps groaned under our weight, and the air grew colder with each one. When we reached the bottom, my flashlight beam caught on something that made my blood run cold. There were rows of old wooden chairs, arranged like a makeshift congregation. Facing a crude altar made of stone, melted candles littered the ground. Their wax hardened into strange patterns, and behind the altar on the wall was a massive symbol painted in something dark. It looked like a circle crossed with jagged lines. But what unsettled me most was that the paint wasn't faded like everything else. It looked fresh. "We should go," I whispered. My voice cracked. Caleb shook his head, transfixed. "Someone's been here recently." Before I could argue, a sound rose from the shadows, a dragging shuffle, as if feet were moving slowly across the stone floor. My flashlight flicked toward the sound, but nothing was there. Then the humming began again, louder this time, echoing off the low ceiling. It felt like it was inside my skull. Vibrating through my bones, we both backed toward the stairs, our light shaking wildly, and that's when we saw it. A figure stood near the altar, half hidden in shadow. Its shape was vaguely human, but too tall, its limbs unnaturally long. The head tilted, and though I couldn't see its face clearly, I felt its gaze burning into me. Caleb cursed under his breath, grabbed my arm and yanked me up the stairs. We scrambled through the broken window, cutting our hands on the glass. Outside, the night felt alive again, the distant sounds of the woods rushing back as if we'd stepped through a barrier. We didn't stop running until we reached the truck, breathless and shaking. For days afterward, neither of us spoke about it, but I couldn't shake the memory of that figure, the way it seemed to linger in the corner of my mind, as if watching from a place just out of sight. Caleb finally broke the silence a week later, admitting he'd been waking up at night to the sound of humming. At first I thought he was trying to mess with me, but then it started happening to me too. I'd wake in the early hours, the house quiet, and there it would be, that same low, mournful tune drifting through the dark. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. Once, I swore I saw a shadow move across my bedroom wall, though nothing stood in the way of the streetlight outside. We tried to laugh it off, to convince ourselves it was just our imaginations. But deep down, we both knew the truth. Whatever haunted that church hadn't stayed behind. It had followed us months later. Caleb left town without a word. I heard through a mutual friend that he'd started drinking heavily, claiming he couldn't take the dreams anymore. Dreams where the church wasn't abandoned, where it was full of people humming that same dreadful tune, all staring at him with hollow eyes. As for me, I avoid the area altogether. Even driving near those hills makes my chest tighten. But no matter how far I go, I can't escape the sound. Some nights, I wake to find my window cracked open, though I'm certain I closed it before bed. The cold air seeps in, carrying with it a faint melody. Soft and relentless, the church is still there, crumbling deeper into ruin with each passing year. But locals say the humming hasn't stopped. Hikers claim to hear it drifting on the wind when they pass nearby. Some have seen faint candlelight flickering inside, though no one dares go closer, and every so often, someone swears the bell rings, its sound carrying across the hollows in the dead of night. Maybe it's just a legend, a story to keep people away from a dangerous building, but I know better. I've seen what waits inside, and I've heard its song, one that never truly leaves you no matter how far you run. So if you're ever exploring the back roads of Appalachia and someone dares you to seek out an abandoned church in the hills, remember this: some places aren't empty. Some places are waiting, and once you hear the hymn of the shadows, it's already too late. Locals always warned about the stretch of highway that cuts through the Appalachian backcountry near eastern Kentucky. They called it the Dead Mile. Most said it was just dangerous because of sharp curves, poor lighting, and the occasional deer that darted across the asphalt. But the stories that circulated among truckers, late-night travelers, and small-town residents painted a much darker picture. The first time I drove that road at night, I was 22 and coming home from visiting my girlfriend. The trip was supposed to take less than an hour, but I left later than planned by the time I reached the Dead Mile. The moon had slipped behind heavy clouds and the world around me was swaddled in absolute darkness. My headlights cut through only a thin slice of the night. Beyond their glow, the forest pressed close on either side, the trees bending as if trying to swallow the road whole. I'd heard the legends, phantom hitchhikers, disappearing cars, even stories about people vanishing without a trace. I never put much stock in that sort of thing, but that night, with the silence pressing in and the empty road stretching ahead like a tunnel, I felt the unease settle in my bones. Halfway through the Dead Mile, I saw her, a woman standing on the shoulder of the road, her pale dress fluttering in the breeze that hadn't existed a moment before. Her hair was long and dark, her skin almost luminescent in the high beams. She wasn't waving for help or trying to flag me down. She just stood there, perfectly still, her head slightly tilted, as though she were listening to something far away. I slowed instinctively, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed not to stop, but curiosity and the human urge to help got the better of me. As I rolled closer, I lowered the window a crack and called out, asking if she needed a ride. That's when she turned her head toward me. Her face was wrong, not grotesque, not monstrous, just wrong. Her features didn't quite fit together, her eyes too large, her mouth stretched too wide, the skin too pale. It was as if someone had tried to create a human face from memory and missed the details. My stomach twisted violently before I could hit the gas. She moved, not toward the car, not away, just vanished. One blink she was there. The next, the roadside was empty, the trees swaying gently as if mocking my confusion. My heart hammered as I floored it, the tires squealing against the cracked pavement. When I finally burst out of the Dead Mile, the world seemed to breathe again. The stars returned above me, the sounds of crickets and frogs filling the night. I pulled over at a gas station in the next town, shaking so badly I could barely hold the pump. The old man working the counter must have noticed, because when I walked inside to pay, he gave me a long, knowing look. "You came through the Dead Mile, didn't you?" he asked. I nodded, too rattled to deny it. He just shook his head. "You saw her, everybody does, eventually. Best thing you can do is never drive that stretch after sundown again." Over the next few weeks, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was exhaustion or a trick of the headlights. Maybe someone had been playing a prank. But the memory gnawed at me, surfacing in dreams where the woman's too wide smile glowed in the dark. Then one night I made the mistake of driving the Dead Mile again. This time I was with a friend, Caleb, the same guy who'd once dragged me to that abandoned church. He'd always been skeptical of ghost stories, and when I told him what I'd seen, he laughed it off. "You sure you didn't just see some drunk in a nightgown?" he teased. We set out around midnight, his pickup rattling along the back road. I felt a pit in my stomach as we approached the Dead Mile, the forest looming like a black wall. Halfway in, my worst fear came true. She was there again. The same pale dress, the same stillness, the same tilt of her head. This time Caleb saw her too. His laughter stopped instantly, replaced by a strangled curse. "What the hell?" Before he could finish, the figure moved, but not like a person. She flickered, like an image skipping frames, appearing closer to the truck with every blink of our eyes. 1 second she was on the roadside. The next, she was in the center of the lane, her head snapping toward us with a speed that no living creature should have. Caleb swerved violently, the truck fishtailing across the asphalt. For a moment I thought we'd flip, but somehow he straightened out, the tires screaming as we tore past the spot where she had stood. I glanced in the side mirror and my blood froze. She was sitting in the bed of the truck, her dress fluttered in the rushing air, but her body remained perfectly still, her eyes locked on mine in the mirror. I shouted, my voice cracking. Caleb didn't look back, just pressed the accelerator harder, the speedometer climbing, but no matter how fast we went, she didn't move. Finally, as the trees began to thin and the lights of town appeared in the distance, she was gone. One blink she was there, the next she wasn't. We didn't speak until we pulled into my driveway, both of us pale and sweating. After that night, Caleb refused to drive anywhere near that stretch of highway. He sold the truck a few months later, claiming he could still feel her presence in it. As for me, I started digging into the history of the Dead Mile. What I found made my skin crawl. Decades earlier, before the road was paved, there had been a small settlement in those woods. Records were scarce, but local folklore spoke of a woman accused of witchcraft, said to have lured travelers to their deaths, according to the stories. She was lynched by a mob near where the highway now runs. Some claimed her spirit remained bound to that strip of land, forever searching for new victims. Others whispered about a string of fatal accidents that had happened over the years. Cars veering off the road without explanation, trucks found wrapped around trees, their drivers swearing they saw a woman in white just before the crash. State records showed a disproportionately high number of wrecks on that mile of road, though officials chalked it up to poor conditions. But deep down, I knew better. I'd seen her twice. Even now, years later, I can't drive through Appalachia without tensing up whenever the road bends through the trees. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, I catch glimpses in my mirrors, a flicker of white fabric, a shadow too close to the shoulder. Once I swear I heard humming, faint and sorrowful, rising from the back seat. Though I was completely alone, the Dead Mile is still there, winding through the same dark forest. People still drive it, some oblivious, some curious, and every so often, someone doesn't make it out the other side. Locals shake their heads, chalk it up to bad luck or poor judgment. But the whispers always return. If you ever find yourself in that part of Appalachia, remember this. When the night is thick and the road seems too quiet, you might not be alone. And if you see a woman in white standing on the roadside, don't slow down, don't look her in the eye. And whatever you do, never ever check the back seat. I was 17 when my parents sent me to spend the summer with my aunt in the hills of West Virginia. She lived in a house that looked like it had grown straight out of the mountainside. Its wooden beams weathered gray, its roof sagging like a tired spine. At first I thought it would be boring. Just endless woods, no friends, no distractions. But it didn't take long before I realized that boredom was the least of my worries. The first strange thing happened on the second night. My aunt had gone to bed early, leaving me alone in the living room with a book. The old grandfather clock ticked away in the corner, and the house groaned with every gust of wind outside. Around midnight I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate, heavy. I froze, listening as they creaked across the floorboards. At first I thought it was my aunt, but the sound was wrong. Her steps were light, almost shuffling. These were solid, weighted, like a man's boots on wood. I called out her name. No response. The steps stopped, then resumed, heading toward the staircase. My heart pounded as I gripped the arm of the chair, staring at the shadowed stairwell, but no one appeared. The sound faded, replaced by the steady tick of the clock. The next morning, I asked my aunt if she'd been walking around. She looked at me strangely, her eyes shadowed. "You heard him, didn't you?" she whispered. I asked what she meant, and after a long silence, she told me about the man who had built the house, her great-grandfather, a stern, unyielding man who'd raised the family through hardship and loss. He'd died in that house decades ago, but according to her, he never really left. She claimed he walked the halls at night, checking the rooms as if still keeping order. I laughed nervously, thinking she was trying to scare me, but the seriousness in her voice told me she believed it. That night, I went to bed with my door shut tight. But shutting a door didn't matter. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of breathing, not mine, not my aunt's, down the hall, deep, rasping breaths coming from the corner of my room. I couldn't see anything in the dark, but the weight of someone's presence pressed against me. I forced myself not to move, not even to reach for the lamp. Eventually, the breathing faded, and I lay awake until dawn. The days passed, but the nights grew worse. Some evenings I'd hear the boots again, pacing back and forth above me. Other times I'd catch the faint scent of pipe smoke, even though no one in the house smoked. Once I woke to find my door wide open, though I had locked it before bed. One evening, desperate for answers, I asked my aunt why she never seemed frightened. She gave me a weary smile. "He doesn't mean harm. He's just watching over us. But you have to respect him. Don't challenge him. Don't mock him. And whatever you do, don't ignore him when he makes himself known." I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the dread that built each night. A week later, something happened that still chills me to this day. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. When the air in the room grew icy cold, my breath misted in the moonlight. Then the sound of boots approached, slow, steady, crossing the floor toward my bed. I couldn't move, my body locked in place, my chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. The steps stopped right beside me. I felt the mattress dip, as if someone had sat down. My skin prickled, every hair standing on end. Then a hand, not flesh and blood, but something colder than stone, rested against my shoulder. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The hand remained for what felt like an eternity, then lifted. The mattress rose. The footsteps receded, and the room grew warmer. When I told my aunt the next morning, she simply nodded. "He's testing you if he wanted to hurt you. He would have done it already," but I wasn't convinced. The next few nights I started hearing whispers, not clear words, but murmurs, like someone speaking just beyond comprehension. Sometimes they came from the hallway, sometimes from right beside my bed. They grew louder with each passing night, until one evening they coalesced into a single, clear phrase, "Get out." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, clutching a blanket, staring at the clock. When my aunt came downstairs the next morning, she saw the terror in my eyes and sighed. "I think it's time I told you the rest." She explained that her great-grandfather hadn't died peacefully. He'd fallen from the roof while repairing it one winter. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered he'd been pushed. By a neighbor with a grudge, by a spirit no one knew. But ever since, his presence lingered, restless and bitter. My aunt admitted that she'd learned to coexist with him. She greeted him every night before bed, left a chair pulled out at the table, as if inviting him to join. She claimed it kept him calm, but newcomers, especially those who doubted him, always stirred his anger. That night I tried her method before turning in. I whispered into the empty room. "Good night," my voice trembled, but I forced myself to mean it. To my surprise, the house remained quiet. No boots, no whispers, no cold air. For the first time since I arrived, I slept through the night. But peace didn't last. A few nights later, I was woken by the crash of a door slamming open. I bolted upright, heart hammering. As footsteps thundered down the hall, my aunt's voice rang out, trembling with fear, "Leave him alone," she cried. The noise stopped abruptly. Silence fell heavy and suffocating. I raced into the hall to find my aunt pale, her hands clutching the banister. She wouldn't tell me what she'd seen, only that he'd grown angry with me, that I had to leave before things escalated. I left the next morning, cutting my summer short. My aunt hugged me tightly, whispering that the house would always be his, not ours, that he would never let go. Years later, I heard the house had burned down in a lightning storm. Nothing remained but the stone foundation and a charred outline in the earth. But even now, travelers claim to hear boots on the gravel road nearby, or catch the scent of smoke drifting on the wind. Some say his spirit roams the land, no longer bound to the house, seeking anyone who dares to disrespect him. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still feel that cold hand on my shoulder, reminding me that he hasn't forgotten. It always begins with the sound of water. That is what hikers say when they talk about the drowned woman of Lake Fontana. A story whispered across the Appalachian trails of North Carolina. The lake itself is vast, carved out by the damming of rivers during the 1940s, and it swallowed entire valleys, homes, churches, and cemeteries now resting beneath its dark waters. When you stand on its shores at dusk, the water lies so still it looks like glass, reflecting the mountains in a way that feels almost too perfect, as if the world is split into two realities. That is where her story lives, in the boundary between the living and the drowned. The first recorded encounter happened decades ago, when a fisherman was out on the lake late one summer night. The moon was high, spilling silver light across the surface. He remembered it being so quiet he could hear every ripple his boat made. That was when he noticed her, what looked like a woman in a pale dress, drifting along the water just out of reach at first. He thought she was drowning. He rowed toward her, shouting for her to hold on. But as his boat cut through the water, she simply sank below the surface without a splash. He waited, staring into the depths, but she never came back up. He later told others that when he returned to shore, he discovered his net ropes had been severed, as though something beneath the water had slashed them clean. His hands shook as he swore he had seen her eyes just before she disappeared, eyes so pale and lifeless they looked like stones at the bottom of the lake. For years, the story spread quietly among locals, until more and more people began reporting similar encounters. Campers who set up along the lake claimed to hear the soft weeping of a woman at night, carried across the water as if she were sitting just beyond sight. Fishermen swore they felt something tugging at their lines, pulling so hard it nearly dragged them into the depths. Some swore that when they reeled in their hooks, they found not fish but strands of long, wet hair tangled in the metal. There was even one tale of a couple who took a canoe out onto the water during a foggy morning. The mist was so thick they could barely see a few feet in front of them. As they paddled, they heard the sound of water dripping, not from their oars but from behind them, steady and rhythmic, like someone climbing into the canoe. They both turned, but the canoe was empty. That was when the woman said she felt a freezing hand grip her ankle beneath the surface. She screamed, kicking wildly until her husband managed to yank her free. When they reached shore, they swore the mark of a handprint, pale and bluish, remained bruised into her skin for days. Locals say the drowned woman is tied to the cemeteries that were submerged when the valleys were flooded. Hundreds of graves were relocated, but many were left behind. Their headstones pulled down as the waters rose. Families protested, saying their loved ones would never rest easy. Some believe the drowned woman was one of them, her grave lost beneath the water, her spirit wandering the surface in endless grief. But there is another version, one darker, more personal according to old whispers. There was once a young bride who lived in the valley before it was flooded. She was to be married in the little white church that now rests at the bottom of the lake. On the morning of her wedding, she was left waiting at the altar, her groom never arriving, heartbroken. She wandered to the river in her dress and veil. Some say she fell. Others claim she walked willingly into the current, letting the water claim her. When the dam was built and the valley drowned, her spirit rose with the waters, searching endlessly for the life that had been stolen from her. Hikers who camp near the shoreline tell of dreams that come the moment they fall asleep, dreams of standing in water up to their knees, the surface still and black, while a woman in white drifts closer. She never speaks. She simply reaches out a hand, her face hidden by a veil of wet hair. Those who wake claim they can still feel the damp chill on their skin, as if the dream followed them back. The strangest part of her legend is how she chooses those who see her. Some claim she only appears to people who carry a kind of sorrow, as if she recognizes grief and latches onto it. Others insist she is searching for her lost groom, mistaking strangers for him in her endless mourning. And yet, there are darker tales of people being pulled beneath the water and never surfacing again. Boats found adrift, supplies still inside, but their owners gone without a trace. Locals always lower their voices when they say it. But the implication is clear. She does not always weep. Sometimes she hungers. One ranger, who worked the area for more than 20 years, told a story he never wrote into his reports. He had been checking campsites late at night, his flashlight sweeping across the trees. When he heard the sound of water splashing, thinking it was a bear, he crept closer, only to see a figure standing waist-deep in the lake. It was a woman, her dress clinging to her like a second skin. Her hair dark and dripping, she stood utterly still, staring at the shoreline. He shined his light on her and shouted, but she didn't react. He said he felt a sudden pressure in his chest, as if something invisible were warning him not to move closer. When he looked again, she was gone, the water rippling out in slow circles. He quit the Park Service a year later, never giving an official reason, but in town, he was known to warn campers never to go near the lake alone. Even now, visitors bring flowers to the shoreline, leaving them floating on the surface as offerings. They say it helps keep her calm, that if you show her kindness, she will pass you by, but those who mock her, who dismiss the stories as superstition, are the ones who most often vanish. Their belongings left behind like broken promises. One thing is certain. When you stand by Lake Fontana in the quiet hours of night, with the fog rolling in and the water still as glass, you will feel it. A shift in the air, a weight pressing down, the unmistakable sense that someone is standing just beneath the surface, waiting for you to lean too close. And if you listen carefully, you may hear her weeping, soft, hollow, endless, as the drowned bride of Appalachia searches once more for what she lost. They say ghost stories fade with time, that memories of the dead eventually quiet. But not here. Not in these mountains, where grief and tragedy cling to the land like moss on stone. The drowned woman of Lake Fontana refuses to be forgotten. She rises in whispers, in shadows, in dreams, reminding anyone who dares to look too long into the water that not everything buried stays at rest. And so the legend endures. Some come to test it, to challenge the silence of the lake, only to return with stories that chill the bone. Others never return at all. Their names added to the long echo of disappearances tied to the water. Whether guardian, mourner, or predator, her presence is undeniable. She's a reminder that the Appalachians are not just mountains, but memory, and that memory, when drowned, can become something far more dangerous. So if you ever find yourself standing on the edge of Lake Fontana as night descends and the air grows cold enough to mist your breath, remember this: do not lean too close, do not call out, and above all, do not follow the sound of weeping across the water, because she is waiting and she will never let go.